My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of Rebuild North Bay Foundation. This podcast is specifically designed to bring you people who have been through what maybe you have just gone through or that you are concerned about. We created the podcast How to Disaster to show you the breadth and depth of humanity in the midst of this really terrible thing that happened. I wanted to do this podcast so that I could bring some of the most amazing leaders that I've ever known in my life to you. You may have just experienced a disaster, and you may be looking around and you are dealing with trauma and the shock of it. And you may be wondering, I don't know how to do this part. And so we purposefully made this podcast into different sections and different topics of recovery so that you could pick and choose what would work for you at that time. So welcome to How to Disaster, and thank you for giving us your time. Welcome to part 2 of the How to Disaster podcast featuring Amy Bach, Executive Director and Founder of United Policyholders. United, in case you missed part 1, United Policyholders was created about 30 years ago in 1991, and it was in response to the Oakland Hills fire. At that time, Amy and her partner, Ida DeLong, knew that there needed to be a place for those people who were insured to have some sort of role of advocacy and navigation of this very, very tricky, complicated process. Amy is an attorney by trade, and Ida came from the insurance industry. And so it was a natural sort of melding of two very talented people. I wanted to have Amy on because, you know, like our organization, she's there for the long term. We can turn around in a community at about 18 months post-disaster, and most organizations have sort of done what they can, and then they've gone back to their regular missions. It's rare to have an organization so singularly focused and dedicated to the space of helping rebuilders actually get all the way home. I really respect Amy, and I really love her organization. We don't touch insurance in our organization, and we go into newly disaster-affected communities. Our first recommendation is always that they reach out to United Policyholders. We have a lot of faith in their ethics and in their tenacity and in their ability to get it done. Not only do they serve people who are insured to help them, navigate contents, navigate dwelling, navigate debris removal, but they also can work with fire survivors to ensure that state laws are improved, or so that the insurance company responds to some of the unique issues that come up when you do face a massive disaster. In our case, that's wildfire. But in other cases, she does work in wind and rain. So the problems are often similar, but can also be different. And Amy and her team have a pretty solid understanding of what that means. That's why we have 2 of these episodes. In the first episode, we really talked about how they got started and some of the work that they do. In episode 2, now we're going to talk about, what's on the horizon for a disaster? What are some of the laws? What are some of the opportunities? Why is it so important to collaborate? And what are the difficulties of getting funding when you're a long-term disaster nonprofit? So thank you again for joining us on How to Disaster, and here's part 2. So Amy, I'd love for you to talk to us about how has the client or the policyholder's journey, what was it like in 2017 when we had our massive wildfires here, and how did you sort of lead the charge with these survivors in order to make those insurance laws better, but also to highlight where it was going right and wrong, right down to how contents and rental reimbursements and what does like for like mean, and just those sorts of things. Because for some people who are listening to this who've never gone through a disaster, or they're trying to help people, but they don't understand this area of insurance and how it works. So I'd love for them to hear from you.
Sure. There's nothing like experience, right? Experience is the best teacher. We've had a lot of experience in California with wildfires. And the same problems crop up for people after every single one. People don't have enough insurance. So, our surveys indicate consistently 2/3 of the people don't have enough insurance. And those problems usually surface pretty early. So I can remember the local assistance center opening, being at the in the ground floor of the Press Democrat. And, we had our table, and we had our volunteers, people who've been there, done that from prior fires, and can really give that kind of unique empathy that people need when they're so raw in the early days, right? And from the very beginning at our table, people knew or were suspected that they didn't have enough insurance pretty early, a lot of people. So that issue is a constant. And we were giving people strategies for that because we've been dealing with that for so long from the get-go. The other thing that happens very early and happened there is debris removal, right? People have to get their lots cleared. And in California, it has become the norm. And this was not the case after the Oakland fire. There was no coordinated debris removal in 1991. But since that time, there's been a big leap forward in efficiency of getting lots cleared and figuring out who's going to pay for it. And so that has been a good kind of, there's been some improvement for the homeowner. It's not perfect. Some people, who've participated in the group, government coordinated debris removal have some gripes about it. But generally, we're getting lots cleared faster, generally, when we do it coordinated. But then, the problems that surfaced in addition early on in insurance claims were that you get all these adjusters that come in from out of state, right? Insurance companies will say, look, we don't normally have 6,000 claims come in one area at one time. So we don't have enough local adjusters to meet that demand. So we got to bring people in from out of state. So they bring people in from out of state. Well, California has consumer protections that no other state has. And we have worked very hard, and thank you, for acknowledging that United Policyholders and our disaster survivor volunteers have been, we've made many trips to Sacramento over the years to try to get laws passed that would ease the path, because insurance companies have not wanted to voluntarily handle disaster claims differently than they handle like a one-off, house fire. They continue to adjust those claims the same way. So the legislature has had to kind of say, no, with disaster claims, for various reasons, you got to be faster. You got to get the money into people's hands faster. You got to put less obstacles in front of them. And by the way, everything's gone. So this whole idea of making people itemize every salt and pepper shaker and every bottle of aspirin in their medicine cabinet is ridiculous. So we have really worked hard to try to reduce the hoops that disaster victims have to jump through to get their insurance claims paid. But because a lot of adjusters come in from out of state, they don't know the rule. They're supposed to be trained, but they often don't. So it often falls to the property owner to stand up for themselves and say, no, actually, I'm entitled to an advance, a cash advance in California, and I don't have to itemize everything that detailed. I can bulk list things. And so sometimes, the homeowner has to school their insurance adjuster, and people, in some ways, they really, in California, I think, particularly wildfire survivors have learned, and a lot of it, I think, is through our Roadmap to Recovery program, how to be proactive. And the fact that if you are proactive, and that doesn't mean you have to be a jerk, and you don't have to be combative, and you don't have to come in with your dukes up ready to, punch out the adjuster, but seeing it as what it is. It's a business transaction. It's not what you saw on TV with all these funny.
It's not warm and fuzzy.
It's not warm and fuzzy. It's your assets, right? You have the biggest stake in making sure that they get restored properly. Insurance is the fastest money. yes, you can apply for an SBA loan. Yes, you can apply for a FEMA individual assistance grant. Yes, if you're very low income, Habitat or the Mennonites may help build you a new home. But for the majority of people, insurance is their recovery financing source. And we are here to maximize that financing source.
Well, and then, you guys worked so hard after 2017 to make it, not even knowing what was coming down the pike in Paradise, to make it so that they actually had an easier time to navigate insurance just a year later.
Yeah.
Everything that has come after has benefited from your work with the wildfire survivors, your work in Sacramento. And I like it because, we think about the individual who has just undergone this traumatic experience, just like you. And we know that because you did that it's going to remove some of that trauma. Each of those hoops represents a different level of trauma for them.
Yep.
And they're already trying to put their lives together, do their work, their jobs, raise their children, figure out where they're going to live. And then every time they turn around, that thing that they had isn't there anymore. And wild wind and rain is not the same as wildfire. It's all gone. It's 3 inches of oily chemical ash. And we're not saying that one disaster is worse than the other. We're just saying that they're different and they require different advocacy. And I really, I know that it's made a huge difference. And I like to remind people sometimes in new disasters, I'm like, oh, thank goodness that this work was done by the fire survivors and United Policyholders before, because this will make it easier for you. And if you can note what isn't working this time, then maybe there's another opportunity to pay that lesson forward for a future fire survivor. So it just has, credit has to be given exactly where it's due. Can you talk about contents versus house insurance? Because I did not know anything about this before our wildfires, and I was in many people, because they're underinsured, they have to use their contents to rebuild their home.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So yeah, the two kind of main buckets of coverage in an insurance policy that are for your dwelling and then for your stuff, right? Your contents, which sometimes they call personal property. And, we talk about if you were to turn the house upside down, everything that would fall out, that's your contents, that's your personal property. So those two parts of your claim are typically handled separately. So the adjuster will be, the insurance company will be sort of simultaneously figuring out how much they owe you for your dwelling and how much they owe you for your contents. And again, depending on the adjuster, depending on the insurance company, they're going to require a certain level of proof, right, of the value of what you lost. Now, with contents, a lot of people will say, and believe me, we've made this argument in Sacramento, we've made it, to insurance companies, we help people make this argument on their own. Look, I paid for a certain amount of contents coverage. Let's say I have $200,000 worth of contents coverage, right? Everything I have is gone. Why aren't you cutting me a check for $200,000? Didn't I pay for that amount of coverage and everything's gone? So far, insurers have been standing very firm at no, we're not going to do it that way. They have lots of reasons. But we have been chipping away at that over the years, chipping away. So, each fire survivor community, if they're organized, if they're big enough, they get something good done. So your community, I mean, the 2017s did great work. I mean, it's just kind of like the Oakland community. A lot of people just rolled up their sleeves. You had Coffee Strong formed, the block captains, and very similar to what happened in Oakland. They started their own newspaper, the Phoenix Journal, and they had they started an association, the Phoenix Association, and the community really was loud. They got loud. And getting loud gets results in often, and so on contents. So we had started getting insurance companies voluntarily to waive, to say, okay, you don't have to do that list. It started with, okay, well, we asked, we said, okay, you don't want to just cut them a check for 200,000. Okay, how else could we make people's lives easier? How about if instead of listing every title of every book on my shelf, could I just say I had 100 hardcover books and 200 softcover books? Maybe, okay, that would be easier, kind of thing. But then we got, we brought in the Department of Insurance, and they have been a great partner over the years, on and off. And they really helped use what they call their bully pulpit, which is the Department of Insurance couldn't force insurance companies to waive that itemization requirement, because it's baked into the policy, it's in the contract that you are obligated to list everything. They couldn't say, well, no, we're not going to let you enforce that, but they could cajole, embarrass, or kind of, maybe not embarrass, but maybe the better way is
but I loved that our local regional newspaper, which has, I don't know, a million people read it, they named it.
It's a fabulous, and I want to tell you something, the Press Democrat in and of itself is one reason that your community had a more successful recovery than some other communities have had, because you had this additional pressure being put on the insurance companies to do better. So the insurance commissioner is putting pressure, the local media is putting pressure, the survivors are putting pressure, my organization is putting pressure, our partners, you're putting pressure, and together that can kind of move insurance company decision makers in a better direction. They're business people. They're gonna make the decisions that are good for their business. And if they perceive that relaxing the inventory itemization requirement or waiving it is gonna give them good publicity, they're gonna do it. And they did do it. But I think
what I worry about, as our wildfires are so much more widespread across the American West, as we're changing our charter right now into 11 states. We worry a lot about those small rural communities, though, who don't have access to the big newspaper that wins a Pulitzer Prize. That those small rural communities are not well resourced, cannot afford even an emergency manager. Which, in one case, there's a county in Oregon. They just had to let go of a county employee because FEMA is requiring that they have an emergency manager, but FEMA didn't fund it. So we very gently said to FEMA, we are saying that is just not the right thing to do, especially in this era of mega fires. But that's one of the things that is on our list of concerns.
Well, I think it's great that you are working to be an interface between federal agencies and localities. Very important. The role that FEMA plays is pretty important.
We love FEMA, but
of course.
I should also make it very clear that, in case anybody missed the very beginning, you're a nonprofit. Right. We're a nonprofit, and so just that kind of how critical that focus, or even doing things, like your online, your toolkits, the things that you have, tools online that anybody can use in any community to really be an advocate for themselves. So I'd love for you to talk about that, and because it's not an easy thing to do, and it's a trusted source. So if someone's listening.
Yeah. Well, so clearly, so we do have 3 programs. The roadmap to recovery is kind of the meat and potatoes. That's where we go in after there's been a disaster, and we've been doing that for 30 years. So we've done wildfires, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, and we provide a series of education and support offerings for the impacted households. But we also do end up doing quite a bit of interfacing with the local government and sometimes other NGO partners. We do, FEMA, but it's never identical, right? I think, Jennifer, I think you're trying to bring more consistency, which is great, to the post wildfire situation. And I think that's so important because, like I said, we do get better at each time. You guys, we had Atlas and Tubbs in 2017 in Sonoma and Napa, and then we had Kincaid in 2019. Or
Glass in 2020.
2018, 2018.
And to be
Glass, yeah, and on and on and on. And we are getting better, meaning the people that are the helpers, the angels, the people that try to go in and be helpful and not for money. We're not there to sell. And that makes us very unique. I think that, over the years, we've seen, like we talked about, entrepreneurial activities, and they've generally been from for-profit entities, people that want to make a buck, and that's, hey, America is a capitalist land, and that's fine, except that, from our perspective, disaster victims, because they're so vulnerable, they need extra protection. They're not, it's so hard. When you're so overwhelmed and sleep deprived and traumatized, it's hard to decipher a legit sales pitch, from a scam. It's hard. And because we don't want people to make, rookie mistakes, we want to be there to say, if somebody's making you an offer that sounds too good to be true, it is.
Oh, it is.
It is not true.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it can even come from like a company who thinks, oh, they need more people to build there, and I have this lower cost of labor, so I'm going to rush in and say, oh, I'm going to bring all of my own laborers. I'm going to rebuild your house at $250 per square foot when everybody else is $450.
Right.
And what we tell communities is the cost of rebuilding is the cost of rebuilding. And if someone is under, like, oh, it's going to be a deal, it's totally not a deal. And they may have poor intentions, or they may not even understand that the minute they put their workforce on the ground, they will be poached in a place that has a lack of skilled tradespeople. They're going to be paid $35 an hour to sweep. Like, I'd take that job, instead of whatever else the other thing is. And so it's so sometimes it's ill-intentioned, and oftentimes it's good intentions but no actual experience.
Delivery, right.
Right. And then you come in and then you help them, especially like that first, like that third, we call ourselves like third responders. Like, we're here to be like, we'll be here in a year, we'll be here in 2 years, which is one of the reasons why we always run into each other in this space. And one of the reasons that I know that, you're so trusted, and you very, anyway, same approach, but, the three types of people who show up post-disaster are those who want to sell you something, those who want to, put a middle finger in that, sorry, those who want to sell you something, those who want to defraud you, and those who actually want to help.
Right.
And we even had another situation where a guy went to multiple communities, and he's like, I will rebuild 100 of your homes for free. And he really was like, that's when you watch out for the heroes, because he was like an adrenaline junkie for that. And then he would vastly under deliver. I think he finished like 10 homes in Lake County. He doesn't have bad intentions, but he wasn't putting the survivor has to be at the center of your programs.
Right.
It has to be. So.
Well, I mean, that expression "ain't no free," is real. People don't do things for free on a large scale. Yes, Habitat for Humanity can build some homes for free. The Mennonites can build some homes for free, but we're talking about like 10 or, not hundreds, right? So if it's out, yeah. So anyway, I think what United Policyholders has been doing, for all these years, is finding trusted partners, and finding the professionals that are not bringing a big load of BS and making empty promises, but that actually know what they're talking about. And they can give a little bit for free. Like our lawyers, we have really smart insurance lawyers, they can give a little bit of time for free, but they don't overpromise, because they know that, they got to pay their bills. So, hey, so there's that. And then there's, of course, the homegrown wisdom of people who've been there and done that. of survivors saying, well, I did this, or I fell in that pothole and then I, got myself out, and then I, and so we bring a lot of that. So we combine that sort of organic, like, been there, done that, not a professional, but I can speak from legit experience of what happened to me and what happened to my neighbors and what worked for us. And then those professionals that can give some time for free, which is really valuable. I think ultimately, it costs money to put a house back, and it really is awful to lose a home. But those are two realities that you cannot change, right? So, yeah.
It's also one of the reasons why, though, I want to facilitate even more contact between United Policyholders and Fannie Mae in particular, because you're so like two sides of the same goal, because they underwrite 25 to 30% of the mortgages in this country. We found them to be very valuable. We had dinner with them before COVID, you and I, and they've been our probably most valuable partner, because we like to siphon, they ask us for information, like, how does this actually play out on the ground?
Yeah.
And we help communities navigate disasters, but we do it like only in partnership, because if there's any magical wand, that would be collaborative partnerships together.
That's right.
The magic wand is everybody jump into the car, because we're going to do this, and we're going to lock the doors because we're doing this together. And, like, leave your silos, embrace your strange bedfellows and a learning mindset. And, and I've seen, this is why we run into each other, like in Santa Cruz, like you by necessity. I think what happens in disaster before you've had one is you think, oh, the cavalry comes in and it's all set, and it's done, and there's like a protocol, and that's how the toolkit, and it's going to work. And that's just never ever the case. And people are always surprised by how much room there is for improvement. But there's also opportunity to do better, and there's opportunity for emergent leadership. And sometimes it just needs some fostering, which was why it was so great that, like, Valerie Brown from United Policyholders was helping Santa Cruz step up their long-term recovery group. Yeah. Like, there are just some practical, supportive things that are outside of insurance, but a need that you've been filling. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, insurance is only part of the spectrum, so the roadmap to recovery includes, personal finance decision-making, right? So we have all these CPAs and certified financial planners that are our partners. And, we're building these partnerships because, we're looking for those CPAs that, it's kind of like our lawyer volunteers. I'm not going to ask a CPA to do 1,000 free tax returns for disaster survivors, right? That's not realistic, and they're not going to do a good job anyway. But maybe one or two, or maybe they can teach and they can give guidance, and then they can train other CPAs on, like, what are the special rules, for casualty losses. So we're doing that. And, the piece that I think really I'm looking forward to doing more of with you, it relates to the insurance gaps, financing, and the whole, like, how do you avoid getting into a hole where you hire a builder and he flakes? Or, because again, like, as wonderful as my organization is, we're even though we've been around for 30 years, you go into a community, they've never heard of us. And, but policy, what are, you're an insurance company, so the reason that we promote the Roadmap to Recovery brand is because, we do go beyond just insurance. We are looking at that holistic long-term recovery. And the reason that, we help stand up a long-term recovery group, or why, we use grant funds to have somebody on our team participate in a long-term recovery group, is because insurance kind of touches on all these other things, and it's all kind of related. It's insurance and rehousing is what it really is, right? That's the goal.
It is. And it so much depends upon helping a community to organize themselves, because you aren't trying to lead their recovery. We're not trying to lead their recovery. We're like, you're saying here, you don't have to reinvent recovery. And I think that is the most that there is hope. And we'll show you that we've gotten through this. You don't have to reinvent it. Here's some things that you can use, but also here's a service that we can provide without
absolutely,
picking your
absolutely. And Jennifer, leveraging philanthropic dollars is critical. It is critical.
So one of the great challenges in disaster has been the focus of philanthropy has not been traditionally on disaster. It's like there's an immediate rush of funds that come in when you have significant disasters, if they make the news, if people have an attachment to that place. Often in less, poorer communities, poorer counties, you're not going to find Anderson Cooper on your, on the street corner like you did in Sonoma County. It may be like a blip in the news. It may last maybe a week cycle if you're really lucky and there's nothing else crazy going on. But so philanthropy has tended to be, immediate and then very short term. And then for long term, there is virtually, nothing. And I do have to credit that, some of the national organizations like Ford Family Foundation, they understand that they need to pivot, same with Hewlett, into looking at wildfire resiliency, but how to even fund, organizations that are there a year, 2 years later, when wildfire survivors and communities really need that. They need it when the hope starts to feel forced. They need that. And so can you talk about your experience? And, the funding issue is just always such a puzzle.
Well, it's been brutal, to be honest with you, because it's getting better in a weird way because of climate change. I think that, it like a lot of money, like, for example, you'll have, if it's an area where there's people who are connected with celebrities, or it's big enough that it really, hit enough people that somebody knows somebody who knows somebody, you could have like what you had in Sonoma, a big concert. There was the concert in the city that raised a lot of money. Similarly, after Superstorm Sandy, there was a big concert, and that's wonderful. And then there'll be sometimes somebody who's a high profile celebrity who donates money and kind of inspires other people. But it is true that we've worked a lot of smaller disasters where there just wasn't that much charitable money. And of course, from our perspective, because we are such worker bees at United Policyholders, like we are always going to kind of do the work and then figure out how to get paid, how to keep our doors open in a second. It's been an evolution for me, because I was an advocate first, and then sort of a nonprofit businesswoman and a disaster expert second, that it's been kind of, it's sort of a lifelong struggle, to be honest with you, Jennifer, because, if somebody says to me, can you, we're working with a lawmaker in Oregon now who's trying to get a law through that would ease the path for the next, generation, if she asks us, can you help out on this? Well, we don't really have funding for that, but we're going to say yes, because what else, we have to. So what my point is just that, the Center for Disaster Philanthropy is trying to be that aggregator, because what has happened is that it's been very erratic in terms of whether there's philanthropic dollars flowing, and frankly, so I think the philanthropic community is focusing. NorCal grant makers are very aware of.
Well, they have Dr. Kwok. They have Alan Kwok. So he is a leader in that space, and he totally sees what has to happen.
But, Jennifer, I'm very interested to know what your thoughts about this are. So the trend, and a lot of times when we would apply for a grant, we would get turned down because I think the funder would think, well, they're helping the have somes. They're helping the people who have insurance. We've got to have that. We have to help the have nones. And for me, I'm kind of like, well, let's look at this two ways, right? For one thing, we shouldn't be punishing the people that did buy insurance and they shouldn't be in a worse position. So, but the people who didn't buy insurance, in a lot of situations, they couldn't. But sometimes people just make that decision that they don't want to, whatever. So there's that, but it's also that we don't want to, we don't want people to think, well, I don't need to worry about paying for insurance because the government's going to come through and I'm going to get free money, right? That's not helpful, right? The government cannot do that. FEMA cannot do that. So I guess it is kind of, what do you think about it? I have seen a trend of philanthropic dollars going to direct cash grants to people who didn't have insurance, instead of going to like an organization like ours. So any thoughts about that?
I'm gonna have two thoughts about it. I have three thoughts, or 17. One of them is that we do not believe in, we believe that our constituency are wildfire survivors, period. And of course we believe in equity. But if you keep burning down, equity just gets exacerbated every time. And so that's one other issue is,
right.
We only now are we seeing money put into fuel mitigation, but that money is always competing with the issue of equity. So I see those as partners. They should not be competing. They should be, you should make homes more resilient, and you should help to make that happen. And, and I'm glad that the trend is towards there. As far as the cash grants that come in, if you get, like, all of Oregon for their worst wildfire season last year got $6 million to their Oregon Community Foundation. That was pretty much the sum total of all their donations.
Yeah.
In contrast, we got $80 to $100 million in this area.
Right.
And I think that we were lucky that we had Christy Pitchell at the, who was hired by the Turning Point to distribute like 32 million of that of those dollars, and they did it over a period of 3 years. I know Northern California Grantmakers was a big advisor during that time. But a lot of that, but for most wildfire survivors, you ask them, they're like, where did the money go? Because they maybe got a check for $1,000.
Yeah.
And we used to have people who would call us crying over it, because they were like, I was like, we don't have it. It's like, I know that you think that we got $32 million, but that was all distributed through a totally different fund that just happened to have one person in common at the helm.
Yeah.
Most of it went into capacity building, which is needed in the nonprofit sector. And some of it, quite frankly, is still sitting in another organization. And they've made it very clear they have zero interest in helping a fire survivor. That's that they've been like, we're going to do something very different with this money. So I think that there's donor intent. I think when people are sitting on their couch and watching other people suffer, they want to alleviate that suffering. And then it's up to local organizations to figure out, how do we deploy those funds in a way that has 30% to capacity building, for long term, and then maybe 30% directly to wildfire victims. And then also, like, what's the role of the block grants to replace that housing? So we see that there needs to be some reform and re-examination at all levels. I applaud that you have people like Alan Kwok or the Center for Disaster Philanthropy who are like, actually, you do need to think about the long term.
Yes.
You and I were once on a panel where I said, I think I run the least sexy nonprofit ever. And then you came right after me and you were like, I think actually I do. And so I find it a point of pride, though, that we are, I don't have the commercial that's I do have a movie about a fence that makes people cry. And it's honest, and that's fine. But for the most part, like, this is not sexy work. This is just necessary, and it's a slog, and it's long term. Yeah. And this is, so I have so many thoughts about it. I do not agree with the idea that because you are well-resourced, you don't deserve compassion, information, and resources.
Right.
I do think for sure that we need to look at, like in the Alameda fire in Oregon, why were those people uninsured? Like, I was sitting at I went to a mobile home park, and 93 out of the 100 units were completely uninsured. And they were uninsured because for a variety of reasons, mostly poverty.
Yeah.
So I want those people to get their unit. I want that. But I also like this idea that you don't attend to the entire community's trauma is something that I just don't agree with. Yeah. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I have many.
Well, I mean, I do think that, disasters are the great leveler, meaning like it's traumatizing to lose your house if you're wealthy or poor. I clearly, I think, and a lot of people, weren't in a great situation before. the loss. And of course you want to help them. And so I think, like I said, I think we're getting better. I think the philanthropic sector is getting better at doing both, at helping with the short term and recognizing the long term. So that's, we have optimism. We're working in 4 states right now simultaneously, which is a very interesting place to be. But it's scary right now, right? We've got, they're talking about this going to be the worst hurricane season ever, and they're predicting that, what's going on in California. We've got these extraordinary drought declared counties. So yeah, I mean,
I would like, if anyone's listening, like I would like, this is why we think that this is why we know that we have to have a more trusted partnerships where we're like a suite, like a 360 view, because we are there to help the entire community. Like we are like, we just want to help the community help themselves. Right. In the case of Santa Cruz, where we also both are, that's really 4 different recoveries in one lightning complex fire, because they have all these different needs. And I was interesting, I was meeting with some people from a very well-resourced community, and they were like, we don't need to organize. And I was like, really? They're like, yeah, our supervisor does everything we want. And I was like, oh. But I figured out that their love language was talking about contractors and insurance, and that they needed to share information. So they have to be, just like we're asking our wildfire survivors or whatever the disaster is, to band together so that their voice is more louder and more effective. We think that there's an opportunity for long-term organizations like ours to amplify the message that it's a shit show out there right now, and it's really tough for a lot of people. Yeah. And we want to just I like to say we're in the business of mitigating pain. Yeah. And there is a need, and that also means that the more money that gets put towards the issue, that the more opportunity there is for fraud. And this is why, like, it's never been more important to cast a safety net in that sense around communities, and to amplify it.
100%. We've seen some excellent best practices coming out of your region in terms of, county city coordinate collaboration, coordinated debris removal, problem solving, federal, state, local. We've seen the block captain approach. We've seen now, a lot of people are transitioning into preparedness advocacy, right? And the bottom line is, look, no one wants to become an expert in insurance, but no one wants to lose their home either. So if you lose your home, many people find they really do need to get schooled on their insurance situation. And that's what we're here for. But
let's be clear, like that's like half the struggle of recovering from a disaster is insurance. So insurance isn't sexy until you really need it. Right. And then like you are the sexiest at that point, because you're going to get them through that terrible moment to the get them all the way home. You're going to walk them home. And I have a lot of respect for you.
Well, I appreciate that, Jennifer. And, we always say, we hope that you never need us. But if you ever do, you'll be glad that we exist. And so spread the word about us. And so you're an angel for helping spread the word about us. And I'm very interested to see where you take your work, because clearly, people need experienced disaster recovery advisors and that are there on the level, that are really there not to sell a product or a service or get a contract, but to say, here is the best information we have distilled from the past on what's worked and what hasn't, and how your community can leverage all the public dollars that are available for infrastructure, and then how to avoid some of the problems we've seen other communities have. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a struggle. It's just you just can't get around it. I mean, you look at a place like Paradise and, I know there's a lot of frustration and concern. Why is it taking so long? Why are there, numbers so low? And it's just complicated, and there's really not any other way. You just have to slog through, work through, and find the good people like us, that are there for the right reasons.
It's, and you have to, if you want to avoid fraud and gross inequities in disaster, then fund nonprofits that are trusted.
Yep.
And it will actually help that. Like sometimes people ask like, oh, well, what are you going to send us a bill, or what do you want? And I'm like, actually, we're not. We were fortunate that we started with $2 million from PG&E, and that's the only reason why I can still sit here 2 years later. We've raised about 1.8 million other than that. And then we just got, we're for fuel mitigation, another 6.4 million, whatever. But it is, unless that had happened, like we wouldn't have had the space to learn, grow, or the ability to figure out how to serve other communities.
Yeah.
And if somebody cares about this issue, like I'm not even making it, like go to United Policyholders and donate to them, or put them on your priority list, because
well, thanks.
We can't do your work, and we want you to be everywhere. So as we do everything, like I'm very interested in, I would like to hold hands with you walking into a community, quite frankly.
Well, I really appreciate that, because it does take a village, and we look forward to we don't look forward to there being more disasters, but we know they're coming, and so it's great to have another partner that knows the lay of the land, and it isn't their first rodeo, and they're not making things up on the fly, and so thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Amy. This has been Amy Bach with United Policyholders. You can find their information in the slide and below. And thank you so much for being on the podcast, How to Disaster. Thank you, Jennifer.
Fannie Mae, the largest provider of mortgage finance in the U.S., owns 1 out of every 4 loans in the country. You can find out if Fannie Mae owns your mortgage at knowyouroptions.com by using our loan lookup tool. This last year has been quite difficult, and making your mortgage payments could be too. There are options for those available that may have experienced a natural disaster, such as wildfire or the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the options available is a forbearance plan, where homeowners are given a period of reduced or suspended payments to manage a temporary hardship of financial standing. For this caused by natural disaster or COVID-19 pandemic, you could be eligible for a 6-month extension with a possibility of another 6 months after that. During the forbearance plan, the homeowner is not charged late fees. If you received additional living expense assistance after your disaster, and those funds have run out, you still may be eligible to apply for a forbearance plan. When your forbearance plan ends, your lending or servicer will contact you to see if you need assistance or are ready to resume making your normal scheduled mortgage payments. If you don't hear from them, you should proactively reach out. If you are unable to repay the balance in its entirety, you may arrange a repayment plan, or if eligible, qualify for other programs such as a payment deferral or flex modification. A payment deferral allows you to bring your mortgage current. This option keeps your monthly mortgage payment the same as it was before your hardship, and the total deferred amount will be due on the last scheduled payment of the loan. Should you sell or refinance, the deferred balance is included in the remaining amount due. Flex modification is Fannie Mae's standard modification. It provides 20% principal and interest payment reduction on your mortgage. Once the modification is complete, the loan's term is extended to 40 years. Depending on the circumstances, the modification may result in a reduction of interest rate and/or principal forbearance. What is a principal forbearance, by the way? And that's when a portion of the unpaid principal balance, basically the remaining loan amount, is put into an interest-free balance secured by the loan as part of the flex modification. It can be modified by the maturity date or with an early payoff. More information is available at knowyouroptions.com. When ready to request mortgage assistance, reach out to your mortgage company. This is the company you send your payments to each month, and you'll find that phone number on your mortgage statement. Additional relief assistance is available through our Disaster Response Network. Here, impacted homeowners can work with HUD-approved housing counselors to get help requesting financial relief through FEMA, insurance claims, and more. Homeowners can visit knowyouroptions.com/relief for more information or call 877-833-1746. Once again, 877-833-1746 or knowyouroptions.com.
Thank you for joining us on How to Disaster, a playbook to recover, rebuild, and reimagine. I want to leave you with this one thought. Thank you for spending your time with us, and we want you to know that you can get through this. You can recover, rebuild, and reimagine. But there's only one way you're going to do it, and that's together.